So let's talk about the Blood Angels today, and talk about how their FAQ and the big ones to the game might affect the way that they play on the table. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now, in amongst all the craziness of the points changes and the shake-up to 40k in general, there's a new FAQ for Blood Angels, and as they're an army very close to my heart, I thought we'd go over it in detail. Not too much has changed, to be honest. There are a few helpful clarifications, and tidying up the Codex so it's fully functional. So here are the main changes from the FAQ. I will go over them one by one. First up, Forlorn Fury is now specified to only work on one unit. You can't do it on multiple units of Death Company to have an entire army of angry Marines surging across the battlefield. For me, this one isn't too expected. It's basically a reversion to the way it worked previously. I think they managed to leave out the you can only use this once in the stratagem in the new Blood Angels decks, so it's pretty much as it worked before in the 8th edition, and honestly it's still one of the main reasons that I want to run Death Company. It does mean that you're a bit more incentivized to take one big unit of them, rather than getting very excessive, which I think, to be honest, is a bit more fluffy for the Blood Angels. They don't tend to field them absolutely en masse as an entire army. Next up is a small buff to the Blade of Sanguinius secondary. This is the one where you'll challenge your opponent's warlord to a duel, and you've got to try and kill them with your character. Technically, there was a bit of a loophole where if your opponent started them in strategic reserve and then never brought them on, they'd automatically die, and then your character would never catch up with them. All a bit silly and niche, to be honest, though I guess it could have been worth it if your opponent's character was a really weak one that was likely to die. In any case, if your opponent engages in such cowardly tactics, then they're punished harshly, as it just means that you get the 4 points for the secondary. Next up, we have the slightly complicated wording on the Death Company Intercessor's war gear fixed. To be honest, it still isn't really very clear. You can read the full details in the Blood Angels FAQ, which I'll link down in the video description, but essentially it amounts them to having the same options as the Intercessor Sergeants. You can either have a bolt rifle or a heavy bolt pistol, combined with a thunderhammer, power sword, chainsword or power fist. I'm really not too sure why that was quite so hard to spell out in bullet points. Next up, there are a couple of tweaks to the Sanguinor. First of all, it's clarified that he does follow the standard rules for reserves, in that he can't come in on battle round 1 via heroic intervention, even if he really wants to. As I'm sure most people are aware by now, the Sanguinor, if you start him in reserve, can pop up when your unit is charged, a nice saviour of an avenging angel to get stuck into an unsuspecting enemy unit. They may have thought that you were about to wipe them out, but they might have not counted on the Sanguinor being there. Now you can only do that turn 2 or onwards. There's very few instances where you can deploy reserved units on the board turn 1, so it makes sense that they limit this mechanic. Next up, I guess there's a very slight nerf to the Aura of Fervour. This is the one that the Sanguinor gains +1 attack to nearby units for. We already know that it doesn't stack with Shock Assault anymore, but now it also doesn't stack with the Honor Virament, one of the Codex Space Marine relics that can give you an extra attack for a turn. Not really too sure why that nerf was needed, to be honest, but to be honest it probably doesn't matter all that much, as most of the units will be getting Shock Assault instead of the Sanguinor's Aura of Fervour anyway. It is unfortunately just a pretty weak ability right now. Finally, Librarian Dreadnoughts can't use the Artificer of Warlord trait to allow them to get a relic where they normally can't. Vehicles typically can't take relics, and this means that the Librarian of Dreadnought is not an exception to that rule. Could have been fun to give him something like a defensive relic to keep him safe, but alas this is no longer to be. Finally, they've closed one loophole with the Slay the Warmaster Death Vision. That's the one that allows you to trade your attacks for D3+3 mortal wounds on the enemy, provided you win a roll-off. And if you were feeling very gamey and rules as written orientated, you could have loosely interpreted the rules to say that your opponent couldn't make any attacks either. I think that clearly wasn't the intention, but in any case that loophole is now closed. It only affects your character, it doesn't have any effect on your opponent's attacks. For me, most of these are fairly minor things. Forlorn Fury is certainly a nerf if you were wanting to use multiple Death Company units, as is the heroic intervention thing, making the Sanguinor a little bit less useful, but to be honest he will still get to do it at some point during the game, just not on turn 1. For the Blood Angels it's pretty much plain sailing, what was good remained good, and the weaker things remain not so great. Finally, if we just talk about the other FAQs and changes in context of the Blood Angels, a few things clearly affect them. Firstly, they have clarified that if you use a stratagem or the Sanguinary Priest buff to put a unit in the Assault Doctrine, they will now get Savage Echoes. This was a bit shaky on rules as written terms before, but now it's absolutely clear. Sanguinary Priest will be getting 1 extra attack for their nearby units, and also an extra pip of AP, making them excellent buffing units in the first 2 turns of the game. Could make using that 2 command point stratagem well worth it from the core Codex Space Marine book as well. In particular, anything with chainswords will really thank you for that extra AP. From the Codex Space Marine changes, Inceptors, Eradicators and Outriders have been nerfed, and to be honest these are all quite big blows to the Blood Angels army. I know the core of our forces will generally be combat orientated troops, but it was really quite nice just to have some very low costed fire support options, and Inceptors and Eradicators kind of filled that role amazingly just because of how undercosted they were. In particular, Plasma Inceptors are kind of good in Blood Angels as they can use Descent of Angels to get +1 to their hits, and I still think that they remain very playable at their new points cost of 55. Eradicators are certainly good firepower still, but not quite as bananas broken as they were before. Finally, Outriders have taken a bit of a tumble. I think we're not going to see them quite as much as Vanguard Vets, Sanguinary Guard or Blade Guard for the Blood Angels. Still by no means bad, but I think they're a little bit below some of our other assault options now. It was quite nice of Games Workshop to clarify that charges out of Deep Strike into middle floor ruins can now be done on an 8-inch charge, which means for Blood Angels that will become a 7-inch charge, making it actually really reliable if your opponent manages to make the mistake of putting some units on the middle floor against the BA. I think it'll come up rarely, but when it does it'll be very sweet indeed. And as before, I think some of the strongest things that we can do in the Blood Angels decks are Sanguinary Guard plus a Warlord Captain, really cheap points for a ludicrous amount of tax, hitting on 2s and re-rolling 1s. There's pretty much nothing in the game that won't fear a charge from the Sanguinary Guard, and these changes in the FAQs don't change that whatsoever. So overall, nothing too groundbreaking for the Blood Angels, but it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt to some of the unit changes. Let me know if any of the changes are going to affect your army list down in the comments below. If you have enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly be keeping up with the developments in 40k as they come out, with regular videos out basically every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the channel's videos and you'd like to help support, I would just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which you can find down in the video description. If you were thinking about buying any Warhammer anytime soon, Element Games is an excellent discount retailer based in the UK, giving 10 to 20% off Games Workshop's products. If you buy anything after clicking the link, then a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more whatsoever. Can just be a way to help support the channel if you were thinking about buying something already. I do also have a very similar link for Amazon in the USA and Canada. That works exactly the same. Click on that and buy literally anything off Amazon. A small amount goes to help support the channel and doesn't cost you more. A big thank you to you guys who have been using those links, it makes a big difference. And a massive thank you for listening to the video. I'll hope to see you guys next time.